So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions are in the very early stages of their preseason training, right? They are just finishing up rookie minicamp, and the veterans are just starting to get to the facility. OTAs are more than a week away, and it's kind of a down point in the NFL preseason, right? Rookie minicamp is over. Some players are in and out of the building for voluntary workouts, but for the most part, we have to wait another week before we see this team on the field. However, the Detroit Lions have been making some moves in a kind of down point in the offseason, and a point where you don't expect a team to make very many signings. You don't expect a team to add too much more talent to their roster. The Detroit Lions have done the exact opposite, adding 4 new players to their roster and having 4 new contracts signed over the last week, with 3 new players coming in and 1 rookie officially signing his rookie contract. And today I wanted to take a look at all 4 of these players, talk about what they're going to do for the Detroit Lions, why the Lions are signing them, and how likely they are to not only make the final 53, but eventually impact the Detroit Lions in 2023 as a role player or potentially as a starter. Now, starting off, we're going to take a look at the rookie that signed his contract, that being third-round selection Broderick Martin, who's at a 4-year, $5.3 million contract as a third-round selection by the Lions in the 2023 NFL Draft. Now, Broderick Martin was a player that Brad Holmes had his eyes set on from the very beginning, a player that Brad Holmes traded up for, sacrificing 3 mid-round picks in order to trade up into the third and go get the D tackle from Western Kentucky. Now, Broderick Martin as a third-round pick and as a player that was the cause of 3 separate picks in the 4th and 5th round being sacrificed, is a player that most people expect to be on the field at some point this season. The 6'5", 330+ defensive tackle is expected to come in and play the nose tackle role for the Detroit Lions in 2023. A big body player that doesn't necessarily have the statistical side that you'd want to see from a top player, but has the size, has the strength, and has the athleticism to be a top nose tackle in the league. Now, at Western Kentucky, he wasn't the most productive player in the collegiate ranks. However, he was a very good football player, an explosive athlete, a player that has to work on some things, and a player that has to work on especially his pass rushing pad level, but for the most part has a lot of really good and high upside for a player of his value. And for a player of his size, immediately is going to come in and just command double teams, a player that's going to open up rushing lanes for the linebackers, a player that's going to put one-on-one opportunities for Aiden Hutchinson and James Houston, and a player that's going to consistently kind of be the can opener of the defense and take on 2 players at once to open up one-on-one or even free opportunities for other teammates around him. Now, it was said that Broderick Martin was very impressive throughout the first couple days of rookie minicamp, had a couple really nice pass rushing reps, and looked really good starting at the 1 technique for the Detroit Lions. However, the pad level was a concern that still needs to be coached out of him. However, a very promising sign early for the Detroit Lions third-round rookie and a player that could potentially become a full-time nose tackle starter by the Detroit Lions preseason game number 1. Now, moving on to the second signing of this kind of third or fourth wave of the offseason, the Detroit Lions have signed Christian Covington to a 1-year, $1.16 million contract. Now, Christian Covington is a player that has been around the NFL for a long time. He's a long-term NFL veteran, has played for several NFL teams as a starting interior defensive lineman. Most recently was the Los Angeles Chargers just a season ago. Now, Covington has never been the star player of a defense. Covington has never been the 10-sack interior lineman, has never been the elite run stopper, but he's always been a very good role player across the NFL, which is better than 90% of players in the NFL can say. Right? Christian Covington might not be the superstar, might not be an elite playmaker, but he's a really good, cheap NFL veteran that's going to come in and teach guys like Broderick Martin, teach guys like Levi Onwuzurike, teach guys like Aleem McNeil and some of the younger pass rushers and some of the younger interior linemen on this roster, some of the ins and outs of the game. And I think Christian Covington, honestly, was brought in to mentor guys like Broderick Martin, a player that was brought in to mentor some of the younger guys because he's been around the league. He knows what it takes to make it in the NFL. And if he ends up making the roster as the final defensive tackle, I think there's a really real possibility that that happens, but I don't think he's necessarily going to be the biggest impact player. He's a good run supporter, a good run stopper, adding some more size in the interior of that defensive line, probably a backup mostly to Isaiah Buggs if he does end up making the roster. But I think he was brought in more as a mentorship role. I think he was brought in kind of as a last resort defensive tackle that still brings some size and run stopping ability, but I don't think was brought in necessarily to play or start for the Detroit Lions. This is a 1-year, $1.16 million contract, a contract that has very low risk, right? If he ends up not making the roster, you cut him and end up paying very minimal dead cap. And it's a player that if he ends up making the roster is probably going to outplay the $1.16 million contract that you're going to have used up on him. Now, the Detroit Lions ended up having a lot of camp invites this year, as they do every year, right? You invite the rookies that went undrafted. You invite the rookies that you think could potentially have what it takes to get a UDFA contract and compete in the preseason. And while most players end up falling through the cracks, the Lions ended up signing 2 players, the first of which was XFL kicker John Romo, who numbers I couldn't find from the XFL season. The XFL doesn't keep their numbers very well, and I couldn't find the exact numbers of his kicking. But going back to his final year as a Hokie at Virginia Tech, he was 34 of 34 on extra points made, as well as 18 of 22 on field goals made in his final season, having 7 kicks be from 40 plus yards away. Now, John Romo is a fairly consistent kicker. I'd say numbers range right around where Michael Badgley was a season ago. However, I think John Romo has a little bit more leg, and I think he has a little bit more distance on his kicks, which is something the Lions have really been looking for and really been searching for since Matt Prater left for the Arizona Cardinals a few seasons ago. I think John Romo is a player that very much has an opportunity to make the roster. If he outperforms Badgley in the preseason, he will make the roster. Badgley did get re-signed, but doesn't have a crazy contract, and the Lions can move on immediately if he is outperformed by Romo in the preseason. Again, I think Romo has a little bit bigger of a leg. I think he has a little bit more distance on his kicks. And for 2 players that kick very similarly percentage-wise, now, the last player that was signed by the Detroit Lions this preseason was Dylan Drummond, a player that didn't initially get an undrafted free agency contract, but was invited to rookie minicamp. Now, Dylan Drummond is a player that impressed a lot of people at rookie camp. He ran some pretty good routes, showed some really good hands, and ended up being the sole player not from the XFL to end up getting and signing a rookie contract that was only and solely invited to rookie minicamp. Now, Dylan Drummond is a player from Eastern Michigan who's always been a good role player for the Eagles, but has never really been a star football player at the MAC conference. Last year, Dylan Drummond had 33 receptions for 525 yards and 3 passing touchdowns while averaging 15.9 yards per reception. Now, a player that never put up huge numbers, a player that doesn't have a great RAS score, and a player that is coming out of a small school versus subpar competition is never really going to be a guy that you expect to go very high in the draft. And Dylan Drummond never really had any draft hype. However, after showing up to rookie minicamp and impressing a lot of the coaches, he is officially on the 90-man roster at this point and is going to have a chance to impress throughout OTAs, training camp, and the preseason. Now, Drummond is not a player that I expect to make the Detroit Lions roster, obviously, with Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, and now you have, of course, guys like Marvin Jones and Antoine Green. There is a lot of competition for that wide receiving spot, as well as being 3 UDFA wide receivers that were signed before him. There's going to be a lot of competition. However, Dylan Drummond has already overcome the odds. A lot of players that get invited to rookie minicamp don't end up making it out. And Drummond already, in a way, is a success story from that front. I wouldn't count him out of anything in this preseason, so I wanted to mention him as he is the newest wide receiver to sign to the Detroit Lions wide receiving corps, a hometown kid that is getting an opportunity to make it in the NFL. We've seen worse athletes make it. We've seen less production make it in the NFL, so there's nothing that indicates that Dylan Drummond can't make an NFL roster, and succeed at the next level. So with all that being said, though, that is all I have for you guys today. The newest additions to the Detroit Lions offense and defense. The Lions add 3 new players, a wide receiver, a kicker, and a veteran defensive lineman, as well as securing Broderick Martin, the 3rd round selection in a 4-year contract. So with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. If you enjoyed the content, make sure you get down below and like the video and subscribe. Helps the channel out a ton, as well as hitting that bell notification so you never miss a Detroit Lions upload. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!